Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, and as always, I am joined by my friend Scott Coleman. Scott, it was a brutal week for the Braves, but alas, here we are with episode 2 and plenty to talk about.
Hey, Brad, good to be on with you. As you said, it was not the friendliest of weeks for the Braves, but as we do on this podcast, as longtime listeners know, we try to talk through it and find the silver linings and just try to hope that the Braves have some better days on the horizon.
They certainly will. And before we dive into all of that, episode 1 is available in your feed right now as well. So if you missed any of that, if you're just finding the podcast, first of all, thank you for finding the podcast. I know we have a bunch of people that have come over with us from Battery Power. Welcome aboard. Also, if you're finding us for the first time, we definitely appreciate you joining us. We are wall to wall with Atlanta Braves coverage with myself and Scott, as well as Stephen Tolbert and Sean Coleman. We're also part of the Foul Territory Network. It's great to be a part of that crew. And please continue to leave ratings and reviews. We were blessed to have the Apple and Spotify charts crashed in a positive way by our following the last couple of days. That was great to see, and keep it coming. We do appreciate that. But with all of that out of the way, we'll get sort of broad at the top of this podcast. We'll kind of dig into the weekend series between the Braves and the Dodgers. It was a really rough week, as we both just referenced, but 1-5 for the Braves. They have only lost 5 of 6 twice all last season. Even with that, they're 20-12, so it isn't as if the sky is falling. We'll probably come back to that theme in a second, but as we'll kind of come back to later as well, the offense has been what is letting the Braves down, and that's a bit of a change from usual. But Scott, I mean, broadly speaking, and we'll dig in more with more detail here, but it's the offense, and it's like kind of a shrug. It's like it's pretty hard to watch right now, which is not the usual for this team.
Yeah, it's very bizarre, especially after the historic run that basically the same lineup from a year ago did. And I mean, just night in and night out, the Braves just cannot score. It's very, very weird to watch. I guess big picture, 20-12 after about 5 weeks of the season. You know, if we came on and talked in the final week of spring training that the Braves would be 20-12, you take it. Of course, obviously, that's a good pace. It's about 100-win pace, and that's all fine and dandy. But it doesn't feel like that right now. The vibes are not great. It seems like the players are pressing a little bit. If you go on social media, it does seem like the world is ending. And to be clear, the Braves have not played well. They got beat up pretty good by the Dodgers this weekend. It was really the first time in a while, going back multiple seasons, where the Braves were just outclassed in basically every facet. And that Seattle series was tough as well, just ran into some good pitching. So there are certainly some things that are concerning, especially the offense. I guess there is a glimmer of hope that a couple of these stars who have underperformed so far seem to be awakening a little bit with the way they performed over the weekend. And the pitching staff, especially the starting rotation, continues to be really good. You just have to hope that the bats are going to wake up and the pitching will continue to be good.
Yeah, that's a good way to kind of frame it. And you referenced it in passing, but I'll just say this too. The Braves are currently on a 101 win pace. And if you sort of compare that pace to the vibe right now, those things are diametrically opposite. It really is kind of hilarious to take a half step back and be like, hey, this team is still 20-12 and on pace for 100 wins. But I am with you all the way. And it's easy to see why after the worst week in a while for this team. So we'll get into what happened this weekend kind of chronologically now, because there is plenty to discuss. Friday's game was the most competitive of the 3 in Los Angeles. It ended up being an 11-inning loss for the Braves. And once again, it was the offense that let them down. They only had 6 hits and 1 walk in 11 innings. You referenced the guys who've come out of it a little bit in terms of their struggles. Austin Riley and Ronald Acuna are those 2 players. They were the only 2 guys that had a pulse offensively over the weekend, and they were also the guys who made dents on Friday. Riley hit a home run. Ronnie also did to tie the game up. And I don't know about you, Scott. It was nice to see Ronnie turn on a fastball up in the zone. He's been missing that pitch quite a bit this season. We'll get into kind of the nitty-gritty of the extra innings in a second, but broadly speaking, at least we saw Riley and Acuna come alive a little bit.
Yeah, it was good to see. I think especially Acuna, it seems like the book on him right now is fastballs up in the zone. He's been getting peppered with those, and he's either been fouling them off or swinging and missing, which is pretty stark from and different from what he did a year ago. And so for Acuna to get on top of the ball, 95 in the upper zone, hit a skyscraper that just cleared the left field wall. It was great to see Ronald do that. He had a couple of big hits or hard hits as well on Saturday, which is an encouraging sign. Because frankly, the Braves need more out of their trio. Matt Olson has been awful for a couple of weeks now. Offensively, defensively, he had a rough weekend as well. And you mentioned the Riley home run, 450 feet is a good sign. Let's hope it just kind of helps him settle in. And he had a couple of other hits over the weekend. But overall, man, it's going to be a theme of this podcast. The offense was not good enough, only 6 hits and one walk in 11 innings. One walk in 11 innings is not going to cut it. We'll talk about the Braves and some of their swing happy ways a little bit later in the show. Just, man, you would like to think the offense was going to be able to pick up Charlie Morton, who was very good on Friday night against a loaded lineup, and they just couldn't do it, and that was the difference in the game.
For sure. And that's been a theme the last week or so, even beyond that, is that the pitching has been good enough to win. Even if it hasn't been perfect every single night, it's been good enough to win every night, basically, other than Saturday when things kind of blew up. But yeah, Morton was very solid. They had opportunities. They got one run in the 10th inning. And essentially, I don't know about you, I feel like getting a run in extra innings is kind of the baseline. You have to get one in every inning,
Yeah.
just to live in the current Manfred state of baseball with the free runner on second base. They got one in the 10th. Iglesias couldn't quite hold it against the top of the Dodgers order. Look, giving up a run is, again, it goes both ways. One run's the baseline. You kind of expect to win maybe if you get a run, but it's not like a guarantee. And Otani sort of tied the game up with not even a really an easy pitch to hit, I would say. So that was kind of a neutral in the 10th. And maybe the microcosm of the entire weekend in some ways was the top of the 11th inning, in which the Braves had a runner on second base, of course, the inherited runner, with Ronnie and Ozzy Albies and Austin Riley up to the plate. They didn't score at all there. And given that's the baseline and that's the top of your order, it was kind of over right then and there. Like, obviously, they could have held them. They didn't do that. And that's why they lost the game. But it was just a missed opportunity that was right in front of them. And nothing's guaranteed in that spot. You're in extra innings for a reason. There's lots of variance. But when you don't score, it's like you're almost asking to lose.
Well, and we're going to talk about Pierce Johnson's injury in a moment. And no disrespect to Jesse Chavez, who we all hold near and dear to our hearts. But when the Braves did not score in the 11th and Los Angeles had the top of their lineup coming up in the bottom half of the inning, which is hitting very well right now. It's about as opposite of two sides as you can have. The Braves' big trio really is not hitting at all, whereas Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, and Shohei Ohtani gave the Braves the full Shohei Ohtani experience this weekend. He just destroyed them single-handedly. I think Shohei outscored the Braves, which is pretty impressive for a single player to do. Of course, the game was not going to end well. Jesse Chavez came into an impossible situation and gave up a little bloop to center field. I thought Michael Harris might have a chance. He didn't dive for the ball, which was a little frustrating in that spot. Quite literally, if the ball gets down, the game is over. It's frustrating, especially knowing how Saturday and Sunday would end up going. It felt like Friday night was the one chance the Braves really had to salvage a game in the series, and they weren't able to do it despite the multiple chances. And other than the Riley home run and the Acuna home run, the offense was invisible. I mean, it was largely nothing going on for most of the night. Couldn't do much of anything against Gavin Stone, the Dodgers starter, or any of their relief corps. Just a frustrating loss, to be sure. It was the second walk-off loss for the Braves in 4 days this past week. They also had the walk-off in Seattle. And just a tough way to lose games. Every loss is going to sting. But when you lose in 11 innings in a game that I think it's fair to say you really felt like you should have won, it just stings a little bit extra.
That is for sure. And it was a close game. Obviously, it's a coin flip in theory when you go to extra innings. Also, the Braves played their sixth extra inning game on Friday in their first 30 games. That's a pace that is like sky high. Last year, just for reference, they only played 11 games in extra innings all last season. They are more than halfway there through their first fifth of the year, basically. So playing close games, they're not mashing as much offensively. That kind of leads to some of that. It was also at the end of Friday because Philadelphia won. That was the first time the Braves have not been in first place in the NL East since April 2nd of last year. So it's basically been 13 months since they had been out of first place. And as of now, when we're recording on Sunday, they're still out of first place, but that was the first time. And a little bit of wake up call. Obviously, it's worth noting that the Phillies have been scalding hot. So it wasn't as if they were chased down by a bad team. Philly is the currently number one team in baseball, I believe, by record. But still, you don't want to be in second place if you can help it. And the Braves are currently there as of early May.
And I don't know what the Phillies did to the scheduling gods. And at the
They
end
have
of the
played
day,
no one. No one.
yes, at the end of the day, the Braves and Phillies are going to play the exact same schedule.
Yes.
I know there was a lot of back and forth about this online and on social media. But the Phillies have not played a team with a winning record since the Braves left town on opening weekend. That was March 31st was the last time the Phillies began a game against a team above 500. And I think throughout the whole month of May, I don't know if they play a single team that's currently has a winning record. Again, it's all going to balance out, right? They're going to have a tough schedule in June, July, August, September. Hopefully, the Braves schedule calms down. It's not an easy week ahead, but man, I mean, you talk about playing. They opened up early with the Phillies, then they played the Rangers, the Diamondbacks, last year's World Series teams. They already made the trip out to Seattle and Los Angeles, which is probably going to end up being the two best teams on the West Coast. They got the Astros out of the way, although Houston has struggled a bit. They just played the Guardians. The Braves have not had an easy schedule. So again, I know it's tough to have the glass half full take right now, but 20-12 against a pretty good schedule so far. It could be worse, I guess. Maybe it's not all roses. We're not going to come on here and just say everything is fine and dandy. But 20-12 against a really difficult schedule, especially lately, I think you have to take it and just kind of hope that things right themselves and the team figures it out.
Let us move on to Saturday in a game we can not even really talk about the blow by blow because it was so lopsided. An 11-2 loss, their fourth loss in 5 games, and only their second real blowout of the year. The only other time they've been blown out this season was a 16-4 loss to the Mets, where Alan Winans was pitching and got shelled, and they ended the game with Guillorme on the mound. That was probably the most embarrassing loss of the season, but this is on Saturday was probably number 2 on that list. It was also, I'm not sure if you caught this across baseball, Scott. It was a blowout day on the whole. 4 games were decided by at least 11 runs on Saturday. That tie for the most on a single day in baseball since 1900. So 120 plus
Oh,
years. And that did not even
wow.
include the Braves loss. The Braves lost by 9. So they actually are not included in that. So it was blowout day on Saturday in baseball, and the Braves were on the wrong end of one of those.
We knew going in that it was going to be a tough night.
We said it.
Um,
We said it on the last show. On
yeah,
episode 1, we said, I believe it was like, hey, Saturday is the one that if the Braves are going to lose, it's probably going to be the one that's the toughest on paper because it was Elder versus Elder was not exactly the best pitcher on the mound against Glass now, we'll say.
no, it was a bad start for Bryce. 3 1/3 innings, 7 runs allowed, 7 hits, 4 walks, handful of home runs. It was not great, and few pitchers are going to go to Los Angeles this year and pitch well against that Dodger lineup. But we knew that going in, Elder was going to need to be just about perfect in order to survive. And then when the Dodgers are countering with their ace, and Glasnow has been one of the better starters in major leagues this year, it was going to be an uphill climb. The game was over early, is I guess I know Gabe Burns of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution tweeted out early, "Go enjoy your Saturday night." I guess after a tough Friday night, it was I don't even know the right word. The fact that this one was over early and not a crushing loss. But it was going to be a tough one regardless. Elder just did not have it early on, and it was a game that was pretty much out of hand by the 4th inning.
Yeah, and maybe we could take this a second now, not necessarily a super deep dive, but it's a topic that we've discussed many times in the past on our old feed, but for new listeners and just as a rekindling of sorts, keeping expectations in line for your number 5 starter is probably appropriate. And that's coming from me, and I'll raise my hand. I have always been, I would say, more skeptical of Bryce Elder than most. Even when he was pitching well last year, I just kind of didn't buy it as far as that was concerned. And I think I'm probably going to end up being right about that, broadly speaking. But on the flip side, to defend Bryce Elder, most teams don't have a 5th starter that you're going to love to see against the Dodgers. And as a reminder, Elder was the 6th starter coming into the season because Spencer Strider, who's their best pitcher, is no longer available for the Braves. But I understand it was frustrating. I think we all, including me, tweeted out some level of frustration with watching Elder pitch in that spot. But just to be fair to him, like, nobody's got 7 starters that they love on their team. Nobody in baseball has that situation. And Elder, while he's not terribly inspiring to me, isn't a very appropriate 5th starter in the world of Major League Baseball. If he's facing a bad team, you feel pretty good about it. If he's facing the Dodgers on the road, you don't feel very good about it.
No, it was a tough spot, and I'm curious to see what the Braves do with the 5th starter spot moving forward. They, of course, gave Alan Winans a chance. They gave Darius Vines 2 chances. And I believe this was the 3rd start for Elder. His first 2 were fine. He had to wiggle in and out of some trouble. And when he's right, you mentioned being a 5th starter. I think he is okay as a 5th starter, especially against the not great teams that he can get away with poor command or issuing a couple of walks. But man, it's going to be tough for him against the game's better lineups. We know how good Bryce was in the first half of last season, but since then, since the All-Star game of 2023, it's been pretty bad. I think his ERA is about 6 across 15 or so starts. The strikeouts have gone down, the walks have gone up, the home runs have gone up, and that's just not a recipe that's going to be successful for Elder. I'm curious to see. The Braves could skip Elder this upcoming week. They have 2 off days coming, so that they don't necessarily have to give the ball to Bryce, although they do seem to want to push back the starters whenever they can to kind of save innings. I'm not sure what they're going to do. They could go to AJ Smith-Shawver, who is coming off a couple of nice appearances in Gwinnett. They could go back to Vines or Winans and give them a chance, or they could continue to roll Elder out there and just kind of hope that things improve. They just don't have a great proven option at the 5th spot right now. That is not a Braves exclusive problem. Most
No.
teams do not have 5 really good starters that they can just pencil in for good performances every night. But right now, it is fair to wonder what the 5th spot in the rotation is going to hold, because I'm not sure that Bryce Elder is a bankable asset there.
Yeah, and look, to your point, I just pulled it up. I believe it was since the All-Star break of last season, he's thrown 17 starts and he has an ERA over 5. That's the simple version. His peripherals are not great either. Very low strikeout rate, very not great walk rate for someone in his position stuff wise. So I'm not telling you that Bryce Elder's good. I don't think that he is. But I would just caution people to, like, again, not to belabor the point too much, but you can go to the next guy down the line, and Smith-Shawver is the most exciting option. Waldrop's the next guy in the future maybe, but there isn't a perfect solution for that spot right now. And one more time, that should have been Lopez in the 5th spot, and now he's the 4th starter / 3rd starter along with Morton, whatever you want to say. But they were not planning for Schreier to be out. But as we always say, you cannot have enough starting pitching. Every team wants to have 10, 11, 12 guys that they at least can throw out there. Elder is in the can throw out there list, but they will be. I would say it would be wise for them to plan as much as they possibly can. I would say it'd be a good idea to skip him this week, given what you just said and the schedule and all that, and maybe you try to minimize that spot for a while, because there's nobody coming that's going to blow you away, I don't think, in the majors as of May 5th, 2024. All I would say beyond Elder and the blowout nature of that loss on Saturday is that maybe we should talk about Tyler Matzik in a not so fun way. I feel like this is going to be kind of a dark conversation.
Yeah,
We all
let
love him.
us let us say we do not envy this conversation we're about to have about Tyler Matzik, but I think it's probably time to talk about him a little bit.
Yeah, and look, ERA is not always the best indicator, especially 10 innings into a season, but it's almost 10 right now. His peripherals are better than that. A FIP in the high 5s. It's not good anyway, but it's better than 9.9 ERA. He doesn't look good to me stuff wise, nor does the StatCast batted ball data and his pitch movement stuff. That does not exactly paint a super great picture either right now. And he was out last year, and he wasn't that good before he went down in 2022. So obviously, World Series hero, that will never be forgotten. But certainly, just by the merits, if you cover up the name of Tyler Matzik, Scott, and ask anyone in Braves country if they're in love with this pitcher, they would say no.
Yeah, it really sucks to see this version of Tyler Matzik, because he effectively gave both his shoulder and his elbow to that incredible 2021 run. You mentioned he was not good or effective in 2022, undergoes surgery, and then we were hoping and optimistic that Tyler was going to be able to make a full comeback. But through 10 innings, you mentioned an ERA of almost 10. His FIP is almost 6. I mean, I guess if you really want to be rosy, his xFIP is closer to 4. So maybe there's some fortune on the horizon. But you're right. The stuff does not look great. He's leaving a lot of stuff in the middle of the zone. And I just don't think the Braves are doing Tyler Matzik any favors by leaving him out there and kind of throwing him to the wolves. He is a veteran, of course, so maybe there's an opportunity to place him on the injured list. The Braves are off on Monday and then begin a 2-game series with Boston. Maybe they put Matzik on the injured list, whether it's a real injury or not, and just see if he can work through some things, maybe give him a little bit of a breather, have him throw some bullpens, and just try to recalibrate everything. Because right now, man, you said it perfectly. If you took Tyler Matzik's name away, I don't know how you keep sending out a reliever with a 10 ERA It's just not conducive to winning baseball. And the Braves do have some options in the minor leagues who they could replace Matzik with.
Yeah, and he's been a little bit unlucky to this point. We sort of paint that picture, but it is true. If you look at all of the peripheral numbers, he's been unlucky. But this is not everything. But he's not throwing as hard as he used to, and that happens, with age and being out for a year and a half. But he was averaging with his fastball in the 96 range back in that World Series run, and missing bats as a result, also getting ground balls as a result. And now he's sitting in that 93, 94 range. And that's not a huge, huge, huge drop off, but it does matter when you're suddenly throwing 2.5 miles an hour less and, things beyond that. So we could do a deeper dive if we need to later on. You mentioned the other guys that are replacement options. We'll talk about Pierce Johnson in a second here when it comes to the news, but they do have Ken Giles kicking around. They have Ray Kerr, who they acquired proactively this winter, plus some other guys who are already in the system. So if they want to get creative, they can go ahead and do that. But at least we wanted to mention it, even if it's not the most fun conversation to have in the world. Let's briefly talk about Sunday's game. They were down 2-0 in what, Scott, 5 minutes? That's generous, maybe even less
Yeah,
than that. Uh,
it was
they
pretty
went
fast.
they went down in order on the top of the first, and then Fried opened his day by walking Mookie Betts and allowing a home run to Ohtani. Two of the five best players in the world, so not a huge shame there. And to Max's credit, he settled in and pitched pretty well until what, the sixth or so, and really only made two or three bad pitches in the entire game. At least they got punished, and they got punished for home runs. But I thought Max was okay. Not a whole lot to discuss there. The Braves only had one real threat in the entire game. It was the seventh inning. Ozuna homered, and I'm not trying to make a huge deal out of this, but Adam Duvall should have been on first base, and they should have had two guys on with two outs. I don't know if that would have mattered, but Duvall very obviously had the fourth ball that would have walked him, and it was like a foot outside, and it was called a strike, 3-1 count, and then he struck out the next pitch, and that was like, all right, we're done here.
Yeah, it kind of perfectly summarizes where the Braves are at offensively, where a should have been ball four seems like a death blow to this team's offensive chances. Because I don't know if anybody was expecting the lineup to come through in those final two innings. You mentioned Max Fried. It's just been an odd year for Max. I believe it was David O'Brien of The Athletic pointed out that his ERA, Fried's ERA in the first inning of games is 15.8. 15.8 through seven starts for a guy, when he is right, is one of the best in baseball. After the first inning, his ERA is sub two. So if Max, I don't know what he needs to do. Maybe he alters his, maybe it's just fluky baseball. Maybe he alters his warm up routine a little bit. Maybe it's just one of those things that'll balance out. But an ERA, I mean, I believe every start but one, he has given up a run in the first inning. And seemingly, if he can get through the first inning without any damage, he's been good. He's been really capable, and the Max Fried that we all know. And once again on Sunday, especially with the way the offense was going, when the Braves went down 2-0 after about six pitches, I think everyone kind of groaned and thought, well, that is not great.
That's right. And again, like if the offense was cooking right now, it would have felt more alive. And look, I will raise my hand. I was thinking, all right, this is a game. They're in it. They're down 2-0 seemingly for an hour and a half. And even when they're down, well, 4-0, it was like, all right, they're still in this thing. When Ozuna homers, they're alive. And this team has kind of trained us over a large sample size to kind of think that no game is over, given that their potency offensively. It just didn't happen. And a little bit of unlucky, I would say. We'll talk about the offense more broadly in a second, but the Braves had five of the top seven hardest hit balls in terms of exit velocity on Sunday, and that in the game, and they scored one run. Lots of 105-mile-an-hour outs has been a theme recently. That does not excuse the offense. I'm not telling you that they're playing well, but they have also been unlucky in addition to being powerless, or however you want to put impotent, whichever adjective you want to use. They've also been unlucky along the way.
Yeah, the lack of home runs is probably the
Wild.
weirdest thing.
Yeah.
I believe it's 3 home runs in the last 10 games. I might be off by a little bit there, but nonetheless, man, the home run ball has gone away. And it feels like they've also had about a dozen baseballs to the warning track that just haven't gotten out. Marcelo Zuna had one on Saturday night or rather Friday night, that almost went out, would have given the Braves a lead in the ninth inning, just died before the wall. Matt Olson had a ball to the warning track today that just died. It's just been one of those things, and it feels like once the avalanche starts, it just keeps on coming. Braves just haven't been able to catch a break. I think maybe this is our opportunity to talk about the offense as a whole. there is too much talent here for this team to continue to struggle and slump the way it has. But we're going on almost 2 weeks now of the offense being pretty MIA. It's frustrating, and I think as an educated baseball fan, you have to know that better days are ahead. But I don't know if anyone's necessarily excited whenever this team comes to the plate because pretty much everyone right now is in a slump of some kind.
Before I answer that and talk about the offense being really, really gross and throwing out some more numbers, we should at least quickly promote our sister show at Dodgers Territory. I know Braves fans probably won't be itching to listen to more positive stuff about the Dodgers, but certainly should listen to Dodgers Territory, available live Mondays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. and also at the Foul Territory YouTube channel. I believe right now the only two team shows on the Foul Territory Network are us and Dodgers Territory. So check that out wherever you get your podcasts. But it's a good point, Scott. Like the offense is the numbers are gross. I mean, you mentioned the 3 home runs recently. I will say this. They only have 7 home runs in the last 15 days. That is the fewest in all of baseball. And I would have lost a bet on the Braves ever being dead last in baseball in home runs over a 2 week sample size this season. It's only 2 weeks, but that just doesn't happen to this team. Just as a reminder, if you've forgotten, this is the same, almost the same roster. I won't say it's exactly the same, but it's close to being the same team that led all of baseball in home runs last year by more than 50 home runs. Like they were leaps and bounds ahead of everyone in home runs and slugging percentage and all that stuff. And the season long numbers are still okay offensively. They're still top tier offensively, but this power outage has been truly bizarre, including the stat that you pulled in their like basically their production runs wise in the last like I don't know 8 9 games. It's been just absolutely gross.
If I told you, Brad, that on May 5th, Austin Riley, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Matt Olson had 8 combined home runs and had played basically every inning of every game, what would you have said? And maybe that's rhetorical because I don't think anyone would have ever expected that to be a reality between this trio that hit what 135 home runs a year ago. I mean,
Yep.
8 home runs, man. That's unfathomable for this trio. Marcell Ozuna was fantastic early on, and he hasn't been horrible by any means the last week or so, but he's
He's cooled
calmed
off though,
down.
big
Yeah,
time. Yeah.
he's cooled off. Sean Murphy being injured, I feel like we're feeling the effects of that with no disrespect to Chadwick Tromp, who seems like a good dude, but I
Yeah.
mean, he's just not he should not be playing. I know that Travis d'Arnaud cannot catch every single game at his age, and that's fine, but there it is felt whenever Chadwick Tromp is out there. It is felt. D'Arnaud, even he turned into Babe Ruth for those 3 games where he was unbelievable. But other than that, d'Arnaud has been pretty bad. Michael Harris is kind of quietly in a funk. He's somebody who, I mean, don't look at Michael Harris's swing rates. The guy is swinging at everything within a foot of the plate, which is a real bummer. I was hoping he was going to take the next step offensively, and he still could. It's very early. It's the first week of May. Michael Harris has not been great. Orlando Arcia has cooled. I mean, really 1 through 9, it has just been tough to find players who are putting together good games consecutively. And again, I don't want to be repetitive. I think eventually this team is going to wake up. Hopefully, it is sooner rather than later because it is downright hard to watch the team swing the bats right now. A lot of non competitive at bats, a lot of 0-2 counts because they're seemingly swinging at everything, a lot of ground balls, which is not a good thing offensively in the year 2024. It's just been a weird ride. And man, I hope they figure it out, Brad, because I don't want to have to keep doing podcasts where it's like, well, maybe this is the next series the Braves are going to figure it out.
Yeah, we're in agreement there. They're top 5 in the bad way in strikeouts in the last week or two. That's not where you want to be. Even if strikeouts are not always negatively correlated, there's a whole debate there that we will not do today. But they have been swinging freely, as you said. You can find some little rays of hope. Even Michael Harris, you mentioned a second ago, hit the ball hard. I think 3 times today, had 100 plus miles per hour exit velocity. Like he's at least keying the ball up a little bit. But this is a couple of crazy stats here this week, so the 2 series, 6 games in which they went 1-5, the team had a 462 OPS. Not on base, that's OPS this week. Only 2 guys on the roster had an OPS over 503 this week. And it was Ronald and Austin. And those 2 guys, while they were fine this week, were not like themselves even. Like Ronnie's OPS was like 800 or so, same range for Riley. That's like human for them. So basically, no one was good in capital letters this week. That's not a huge surprise, given that they scored as few runs as they did and they lost 5 out of 6 games. but it truly is gross. I'll say this now. We've talked around it. I still believe that people are generally overreacting, and it's also understandable. I'm not picking on anybody for doing this. I think that for me, I'm always going to lean on sample size and the record of these players. And this is not like it's a hugely different roster. We referenced that earlier, but this is basically the same exact team that was the best offense arguably ever last year. But even if you don't think that, top five, top 10 of all time last season by the numbers, I don't believe that they're suddenly not good on offense. It's just not believable to me. And I think that generally speaking, baseball fans get in this, especially if things clump together. People tend to overreact. Like I saw some truly, I'm not going to even say something. I saw some truly hilarious overreactions. You know, manager stuff, hitting coach stuff, bench show and so. I get it. Everybody's frustrated, and it has been bad. We just laid it out in deep detail how bad it has been, but it's it's not great. So anyway, it's going to be what it is. I would lean on a couple of positive stats. Like they're currently still after this. Again, this includes this downturn. They are still leading baseball in hard hit rate and exit velocity for the season, even with this entire like power outage the last 2 weeks plus. So like, I have faith this is going to be a good offense. It hasn't been recently. It is maddening. Usually, this team has somebody or buddies hot at the same time as some guys have slumps. Like slumps are going to happen. Usually they're counteracted. And right now they've timed it, unfortunately, where nobody's hot at this point. So I've said a lot of words, Scott, but put me on the record as not being worried. I'm not picking on anybody that is worried. I get it. But I do think that generally, if you take just a half step back, a couple deep breaths, and realize what this team is as far as personnel, there's just no reason to believe they're suddenly not great on offense.
Yeah, and it's the first week of May. All the games count the same at the end of the year, right? A
They sure
win
do.
on May 5th counts the same as a win on September 25th. But I guess if you're looking for the silver lining and the glimmer of hope, it is still relatively early in the year. I would rather have the offense in a funk in April and May than in September and going into October. So I would agree wholeheartedly with everything you said. It is very frustrating to watch, but you just have to think that better days are on the horizon. And hopefully that starts this week when they play the Red Sox and then the Mets.
Yeah, I have one more stat before we look ahead to the next week and also a little bit of news and notes. But the Braves, of course, have won the division 6 years in a row. Everyone knows that. I think it's probably listening to this podcast. This is the seventh year, but this is the second best record through 32 games the Braves have had in that run. They're 20-12. They won the division the first 5 times in a row without winning 20 of their first 32 games. So I know it's wins and losses don't always tell the whole picture. Obviously, that's all that matters in the end. But predictive wise, I get it. But like 20-12 through 32 games is a very solid place to be.
Yeah,
So
that's a great
just
stat.
saying,
I think you could probably repeat it 5 times.
it wouldn't
And
matter. I
can
know.
can we clip that little 10-second clip and just retweet it like every hour for folks? I know it's frustrating. It's part of being a fan. I know everybody is ready to jump off the nearest bridge. It has been a frustrating week, to
Oh,
be
listen. I
sure.
mean, if people could see our internal Hammer territory text thread, we're all frustrated. I mean, everybody's
Oh
frustrated.
yeah,
Even
yeah.
even us, even us, we're all frustrated. It's not like it's anybody. I just I guess I don't know. I just want to be the voice of reason. It's like I'm drawn to being the voice of reason, even if people don't like it. It's the same when I cover the Hawks too. And anytime they struggle, Scott, you'll be shocked to know that I am the one pointing out, like, hey, this actually isn't that bad, and everyone yells at me. It's just kind of my role in life. It's fine.
A little nuance never hurt anybody. Let's you know what, man, it's understandable. I know that I saw similar things. Oh, it's time to fire the whole coaching staff, and Brian Stetker doesn't care and all stuff. No, that's silly. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
It is early in the year. The Braves are going to figure it out. If we're still having this conversation in a couple of weeks, then maybe you and I get on here and start, screaming to the clouds and really get some frustration going. But let's hope that this time in a week when we're talking, the Braves have had a better week ahead and get back on track because there's just too much here to continue to slump the way they have. Maybe it's mechanical things. Maybe the team is just kind of complacent. I don't know. It's a long year. It's 162. They just did 7 days on the West Coast. Let's hope getting back home will help them settle in a little bit and get back to hitting, especially for power, right? Like
Yeah.
that's my main thing. in the year 2024, with how hard pitchers throw and all of that, it's really difficult to string together 4 or 5 singles or doubles in an inning to put up a crooked number. But the home run is the old equalizer. It's that number in the postseason where the team who has out homered the other was like 24-2 last year at a certain point in the playoffs. It was a crazy stat. And not that home runs are the end all be all, but we need the Braves to get back to elevating the ball and hitting it over the fence because that's going to cure a lot of the issues this team has right now.
Well said. Before we get out of here, some news and notes. We referenced Pierce Johnson earlier. If anybody missed it, the news broke on Saturday afternoon. He is on the IL with elbow inflammation, which is not what you want for a pitcher. He had not pitched since Monday. I know our co-host Stephen Tolbert was kind of ahead of this a little bit, wondering aloud on Twitter about why they weren't using Johnson because they had 3 games in a row that were super close that he did not pitch in, and usually he would have pitched there. He's a high strikeout guy, very talented arm. And I think Steven kind of was hoping for better, but certainly was expecting kind of the worst. And the worst is an injury here. As of when we're recording this podcast on Sunday, that's all we know is elbow inflammation. We hopefully it's not as bad as it could be. Doesn't seem to be terribly worst case scenario given all the quotes that I have seen, but it's definitely a loss. He's been good this year. They do have a little bit of depth. They brought up Jackson Stevens. That's a guy that we've kind of liked in the past, but to be kind to Jackson, Pierce Johnson is better. So that is a loss.
It is a real loss because you look at the bullpen right now, and if you know that Raisel Iglesias is locked into that ninth inning and not pitching anywhere else, from the right-handed side, things are not great, to be blunt. And we're going to talk about a possible roster move the Braves could make here. But Iglesias in the ninth, Joe Jimenez has been fantastic this year. That's one right-handed arm. And after that, who do you have? I love Jesse Chavez, but he is not a power arm. He needs soft contact. He needs to throw strikes, right? Like he is not Pierce Johnson. You just talked about Jackson Stevens has obvious limitations. I think he's fine as like the eighth guy in your bullpen to cover multiple innings, but he
Yeah.
is not a power arm. And that's it from the right side. The other 4 are all lefties. And I think the Braves need to make a move to add another power right-handed arm to this bullpen. And thankfully, they do have one waiting in the wings in Gwinnett.
Yeah. So when that news broke, the Braves were pretty quick to Stevens was actually not on the 40 men. They had DFA'd him. We talked about that over the winter, but they brought him back. I saw calls, I'm sure you did too, that they could have or maybe should have added Ken Giles, who has taken quite a route to this point, but he was in camp with the Braves this spring. Former closer, former top end closer, honestly, but it's been a long, long time. He's been on the margins recently, but has looked good to this point. And he would fit the power arm that you were talking about right there. We'll see if they go that route. They also made a trade this week that was a small trade for sure. They landed Jimmy Herget from the Angels for cash considerations. Not a huge power guy either. He actually is kind of a soft thrower, but gets good movement and doesn't walk guys. Like he's kind of more similar to the guys you referenced that are not power arms. Like he's not as old as Jesse Chavez. He's 30, but he was quite good in 2022, but a guy that was available for cash considerations on, what was it, like May 3rd, May 4th. So not the most high profile arm in the world. We'll see what they do there. They like Stevens. We like Stevens. He's like a plug and play guy that you referenced, but they do have some names kicking around between Herget, between Ray Kerr, who they proactively went out and got this winter, and Ken Giles. Like there's some movement to be had there. And as always, bullpens just turn over during the season. We're all hoping that Pierce Johnson's back in 2 weeks, but if he's not, they're going to have to sort of dig deep.
Maybe by the time that people listen to this podcast, the roster move has already been made, but I would not be surprised in the least if the Braves put Matzik, Tyler Matzik on the injured list and brought up one of those fresh arms from
Or by the
Gwinnett.
way, they could also option Elder because this week is not going to they're going to need him. Like they could actually
Yeah.
just turn Elder's spot into a reliever or both. It could be one or the other. Could be, but like we talked about Elder earlier, them not needing him. There's no reason to carry Elder for 2 weeks if he's not going to pitch. So
Right.
use that spot on somebody else.
Yeah. So there are options. I would be in favor of bringing up Ken Giles, a right-handed arm. I don't think they need another lefty in the bullpen, especially with how good AJ Minter is. And both Dylan Lee and Aaron Bummer have been pretty solid lately. So we'll see what the Braves do. The bullpen has been fine overall, I think, through the first 5 weeks of the year. Maybe not lights out perfect, but most bullpens are not perfect. But we'll see in the next 48 hours or so if the Braves make a move. I would not be surprised to see. And as you just alluded to, bullpens turn over a lot. There's a lot of movement happening. It's not going to be the first or the last time this bullpen shifts around a little bit. And let's hope that Pierce Johnson's elbow is okay,
Yep.
because if he has to miss significant time, that would be a definitive loss for the bullpen. He is very, very good, very capable with that curveball and that mid 90s fastball. So let's hope that Pierce is fine. He has said all the right things so far. It doesn't seem like it's a real concern. But anytime you talk about a little bit of soreness in an elbow, I think everybody has to hold their breath and just kind of hope for the best.
Strongly agree. Speaking of injury stuff, Sean Murphy hit off a tee twice this week. Seems to be foreshadowing some ramp up for him. We don't have a timeline, just something to note there as he's been missed. Of course, you referenced that earlier in accurate fashion about the drop off there from Murphy to Trump is the Grand Canyon, essentially, as far as the plate is concerned. Anyway, that's it for the news and notes. Briefly look ahead to a very light week. So the Braves just spent this whole week on the West Coast. It's travel and all that stuff. They only have 5 games between now and the end of Sunday. In fact, they only have 2 of these weeks all year long where they have only 5 games. One of them is in September. So this is the only time for a long while the Braves have a 5 game week. They play twice at home against Boston on Tuesday and Wednesday. Then they have Thursday off, and they play the Mets on the road. So 2 off days in 4 days. Maybe not the worst thing in the world right now with how things are going. Travel plus just getting your mind right. And while Boston and the Mets are the Mets, but Boston is not a team that you super just take lightly. They are above 500 this year. They have a nice run differential. Like that's a good baseball team. But it would be nice to sort of get right at home in a mini series.
Yeah, and surprisingly and kind of out of nowhere, the Red Sox pitching staff has been fantastic this season, which is very on brand and on theme for what the Braves have seen recently. Of course, Cleveland, Seattle, Los Angeles, all
Did you
those
see the
teams can
Seattle
pitch.
stat, by the way? Seattle, there was a stat making rounds yesterday where I think it was the Mariners have 20 consecutive starts where their starting pitcher has allowed 2 runs or fewer. Like it's
Wow.
an absolutely unbelievable. I'm trying to find out as we're talking, but it is literally the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I was like, that's insane. And granted, I was not. I almost quote tweeted it and it was talking about, "Hey, Braves fans, don't panic too much." And then I realized I get yelled at, so I didn't. But it was one of those things
Yeah.
where I was like, "Wow, that kind of tells you like what they've been facing recently." Again, yeah, I'm looking at it now. Uh, okay, no, it's actually better than I thought. So, according to Codified Baseball, the Mariners have, in their last 21 starts, allowed a total of 20 earned runs in 21 starts. That's a real stat, Scott.
Yeah, that's pretty good. We said it as much in the debut episode of Hammer Territory, but the Braves have run into some good pitching lately. If they were really slumping here against the White Sox and the Rockies, I think the panic bells would be a little bit louder.
Yes.
But Boston, good team, a team that's played the Braves tough in recent years. Kind of a weird schedule. You mentioned 2 games at home. They have Monday and Thursday off, so hopefully that's a chance for the Braves to just kind of mentally reset, physically reset, and then of course a trip to the Mets this weekend. Mets are playing fine. They're about 500. Anytime those two teams get together, it's always exciting and fireworks. And yeah, it should be a good week ahead, even if only 5 games. I do like the 5 game weeks in September because I think staying fresh that time of year is really important. I don't love it in May, but I guess the schedule is what the schedule is.
Yes, the schedule is what the schedule is, and it'll be Lopez. At least as of right now, the Braves are listing Lopez and Sale on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then that is listed as a TBD over the weekend. So, as discussed, they could skip one or more guys, especially Elder, and maybe make a move there. We will see. But we're recording this podcast on Sunday evening. That's what we know right now.
You think Chris Sale is going to be a little fired up to face his old team?
I do think that he probably will be fired up, and he's been quite good this
Yeah.
season. So that'll be a nice little showdown on that. That's the Wednesday game, and Tuesday is Cutter Crawford against Reynaldo Lopez, and a battle of guys who've been very good this season on both sides. That'll do it for us today on this Sunday. Some programming notes here at the end of the podcast. Again, thank you for joining us on the Hammer Territory podcast. We're going to be here probably like 4 times a week between Scott and I, as well as Stephen Tolbert and Sean Coleman. So go ahead and lock in and subscribe to the podcast. Might not be quite as long on Sundays as we usually were, because usually Scott and I were only talking once a week. We are on the schedule to be talking more than once a week this time around. So maybe a little bit shorter, not necessarily today because there was a lot to talk about, but keep that in mind. But go ahead and lock in, subscribe to, and check out Foul Territory. It does a great job. Those guys do a great job covering the entire world of baseball beyond the Braves, including the Braves, etc. Scott, anything to plug at the end of the podcast?
No, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, again, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all of the support and help getting the show off the ground. I was in amazement. All of the reviews that were left, which helps us out tremendously.
Yes.
People reaching out, saying they were so excited to have the show back. It really does mean the world to us. And we were happy to be back. It was a sad month away. I think I can speak for Brad. I was getting the itch to get behind a microphone again and talk some Braves baseball. It's very good to be back, even if it was not the friendliest of weeks to the Braves. But as Brad said, we will have a lot of great shows coming up this week with myself and Brad, and Steven and Sean will be back, I believe, on Tuesday night into Wednesday morning for your commute. So a lot of good stuff coming here at Hammer Territory, and we'll be back with you soon.
Thanks for being here, Scott. Thanks for everybody for listening. Again, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, and anywhere you might find your podcasts. With all that said, see you all next time.